reserved for Dr. Henrik Ibsen, and it's been like that for a long time. It's been like that because he used to come there every morning, have a small drink, a coffee, and a cigarette, and read his morning paper every single day. And what this does, and I'm going to have to refer here to Sandberg, is that to a certain extent Sandberg suggests that by leaving this seat, by specifically leaving the chair there empty, Ibsen is perpetually present, perhaps even more present than he was when he actually came there just temporarily during the day for 1 hour. Now he's always there, simply because the chair formulates a body that should be sitting in it, that is then reserved for Ibsen. So he's always and never there, currently. And this is a link to what I'm going to talk about. I'll return to this later, but it is about the presence of the absent by suggested gestures and suggested activities, which is central to a lot of what we sort of read into architecture. What could be there and what is suggested that it should be there, and so on. Some sort of background topic here is, of course, visibility, permeability constructs, and one of the things I think we need to do in order to understand this is not necessarily develop the technical side, but actually the interpretational side, not necessarily the analytical side of what is going on within this sort of disjunction between these two formula. I'm just going to not talk about the background so much. I'm just going to say that's why I'm going to study a single building and talk about that. It's one that's been discussed a lot in other fields, which enables us to sort of reach out to those discussions instead of internally to our own discussions where we're looking at what's going on. It's going to require us, Adolf Loos' house for Josephine Baker, designed in 1928, it was never built, has never existed, and this is part of why it's so discussed. So what we're going to have to do is move inside the imaginary of an imaginary of an imaginary. That's what we're going to do through this, which is sort of doing the inception stuff, only in a paper instead of a movie. But central to all of this discussion is somehow the relation between the architect Adolf Loos and the dancer Josephine Baker. And just to say that the origins and purpose of the Adolf Loos house for Josephine Baker remains unclear, since the accounts for not only its becoming, but the relation between Loos and Baker is actually there isn't very much. The most concrete evidence we have is one, Adolf Loos' second wife said that Adolf Loos has said that Josephine wanted a new house because she was dissatisfied with her own house, and that he had suggested he could make one. That's the link we have, and we do have some empirical evidence that they were in Paris at the same time and happened to meet at some point or another. And that's how far we actually know that they knew each other. So it's a project for a commissioner that might not have ever commissioned the building. And one of the imaginaries in this discussion is, of course, why did Adolf Loos do this, and for what purpose, and for whom was this building actually designed? Was it for himself, or for Josephine, or as an exploration, or what was going on? And when he did this, what was the thing he was imagining inside this building, and how did he construct these imaginaries in many different ways? Which means that all of the interpretations of this building builds on assumptions about Adolf Loos as a person and Josephine Baker as a person. Adolf Loos as the architect and what he imagined about Josephine Baker to be. So, central to this discussion is the perception of Josephine Baker. Adolf Loos is almost always conceived as the same figure. Someone who does something to or with Josephine Baker for various purposes. But Josephine Baker is referred to very differently by the different discourses, and it can be summed up more or less in these three images. It's either the société person, Josephine Baker, it's the exotic dancer, Josephine Baker, or it's the jazz performative artist, Josephine Baker. And which of these you place in this building makes the building very different, of course. There are parallels made between Josephine Baker's striped suit and the striped building. There are other parallels made between stripes and Oslo's statements in other cases, which I will not repeat here because I think they're irrelevant and arguments of convenience, but all the same. The Baker house is to some extent, it's following the standard setup of a building of this type. It's got a main entrance here that leads up to the main representative floor with a servant's. It's got a main entrance there, so it leads up to the representative floor with a stair that continues up to the private floor. There's of course a servant's part here, which you enter sort of on the side or from this area, and you have a cellar that's storage. Now, it should be noted also that when looking closer into these drawings and models, they do not fit together. So this is actually one of the problems. Unless the servants are hobbits, they cannot enter the servant floor, because this height, when you do the section, is not enough. There's no way you can fit that in. So that's why also in some sections they move this entrance around so that there's enough stairs before coming down to the servant floor to actually enter the servant quarters and so on. I have chosen in my analysis to use the plan as the figure that is, you know, the dominating figure. I analyzed based on the plan and adjusted the section to work according to that. Because you have to choose one somehow. The setup is very much following this kind of what was going on there, and which was much subscribed to, which was about separating flows. We saw this earlier in this symposium, of making sure that the servants had one flow and the public or the owner and the guests had another flow within the building. And this shows in many different ways. However, it deviates from the common setup, as Beatrice Colomina argues, that there's a sequence of visibility that empowers the person that is leader inside the building compared to the person entering the building and so on. And we're going to look a lot about on that particular thing. So if we look at visibility and permeability in the Baker house, we could do it the standard way, and we're going to do it the standard way. Or the standard way, we can't really say that. But anyway, this is permeability and visibility analyzed internally to the building and with an exterior added. And this is exterior added through the method of mirroring, which I sort of talked about yesterday. But we can see that it leads to a main entrance and service entrance being very different also internally to the building as it relates to the exterior. And we see also that the patterns follow a similar but not dissimilar, a similar but also dissimilar pattern. And why is this? Well, it's partially because in the visibility analysis, which is above, you have to take into account that what is here, here, and here, and here, this area is a pool that you access from you access from the top floor, but there are windows here that allows you to see through, primarily upwards, because there's a reflection looking downwards. But that is at least it. So this is why suddenly when looking at visibility, we have a lot of integration on the top floor comparatively to looking at permeability in both kinds of analysis. If we compare these two patterns, looking at internal and external and with an exterior, we first of all see that I'll point out there's a 6 there and a 9 there integration. We can see that to some extent one of the things that happens with the building is that internally it's a much deeper building somehow than in relation to the exterior. No, it's a shallower building. Sorry, integration works the wrong way. It means that to the visitor it's a visually deep building to a much higher degree than to internally to the people living there, and also it's much more shallow visibly for all of them than it is permeability-wise. We can also see that there's a larger distinction between visibility and permeability for the visitor than it is for the ones in the building. There's a larger interior and it emerges in much clearer locations. It's there, here, and here. So it operates differently, even the disjunction, for a person visiting than a person living there, providing we assume that the relation to exterior is about describing how it's perceived by, and used by a visitor, which we'll return to soon. Some things can't be explained by this plan analysis, which is why also I did a number of section analysis, which become telling. I can't unfortunately go in so much on these today because we don't have time. And I'm just going to point out that one of the questions that this was suggested already in 1990 by Turner and Penn, but it's where's there sort of done, and it's been discussed what would points floating in space mean. And I'll just summarize by saying they seem to actually mean a lot, and I think that this is something that is touched upon or pointed to by Peponis and Weinman when they're saying that integration seems to be points you move to rather than points you move from, which would suggest that in a section analysis, integration is showing points you would look towards rather than points you would look from, and then it suddenly starts to make sense. This is a point you look towards, so you look also through it, and then it starts to make sense. And it starts to say a lot about this. It starts to also say a lot when you compare it to atrium constructs of other buildings, which I removed from the current presentation. Yes. I'm not going to go into the technicalities of how I did all this. You can read it here. But, sorry, I have to check that. There we go. Now, like I said before, the interpretation of these properties balance on a complex set of understandings that involves historical, social, and cultural context, concurrent architectural ideas, and the views of the individuals who love the Flaws and Josephine Baker. Similarly, the interpretation of their respective social and cultural position and status coming to the equation most distinctly. The more common analysis suggests that Law's design is voyeuristic and driven by Law's desire for Josephine Baker. Specifically Baker's body, and to various degrees incorporates references to the difference between the cultured and the exotic or primal. Contrary to this, Shapiro proposes that it's a celebration of Baker as an individual, and that the celebrity status of Baker compared to Law's declining position at the time suggests that it's a project of admiration and the wish to offer Baker a stage for her art. Now, this is problematic, of course, because we can only make about what's actually going on, but we need to look back at the society at that time and not rush ahead with analysis as if this building was designed today, because it would probably mean different things. And it would mean also different things in different places. And as, for instance, we cannot assume that status in a cultural hierarchy corresponds directly to all kinds of status. And as Shirley Ardner puts it, hierarchies do not follow singular rules of class or gender or influence, but are full of different categorizations which relate in a complex manner, such as that genders can be subordinate or dominant across classes, and that such sorting algorithm, historically in Europe, set significant priority to gender. That is that even if there was people came from different classes, when they met, it tended to flip into a gender subordination rather than a class subordination, unless it was groups of people meeting with groups of different classes. And we can refer to Massey's and Harvey's analysis of Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, where Harvey can't make sense of the image of the picture because he sees both Deckard and Rachel as part of the oppressed class, so they should join in revolution. Whereas Massey says, well, if we look at them as gender, it's obvious that they cannot join because Rachel is subordinate to Deckard, and therefore they will never sort of join on equal footing and perform this revolution. And also we can see that in how she claims that. Also Harvey says that the point at which Rachel, an android in this movie, becomes a human in this movie is when she becomes Deckard's woman, so to speak. So it's this transition into becoming something related to Deckard at this time. Anyway, a central point in this discussion is, of course, the pool, and then we can talk about whether Josephine swimming is a private or public activity, and this can, of course, be contested. And if it's a private or public activity, would she ever do this when anybody except servants and she is in the building? And this sort of could make a lot of different, have a lot of impact on the analysis. However, if we refer back to the introduction about Ibsen's body or lack of body constantly making Ibsen's present, we can also say that the presence of a swimming pool, where you see the surface of a potential swimmer, you can also see the swimmer being around with you on this floor, but you cannot access this pool, is constantly going to remind you that somebody could be swimming in this pool, and this someone who could be swimming in this pool is the person you are currently interacting with. Right? So there's an implied reference there, constantly reminding you of the person swimming, without ever letting you actually see this, which might be more powerful than actually seeing this person swimming there, because it allows you to decide how that would be looking, and it allows you to decide how that person would be swimming, and so on. I'll skip that image actually. Sorry. No, I'll stick to that one, because there's a similar thing going on in the constant sort of interconnection between the public and the private floor, which has to do with the atriums and the stairs. And we can talk about and we can see how, for instance, the main stair down from the private and the public floor does something very peculiar, because basically, although you have an atrium here, if we look back to the section analysis, it suggests it's an atrium for looking up rather than looking down. Atriums for looking down have a different configuration. Atriums for communication have a different configuration, and so on. And also, for the owner, whoever it is, to walk down, they have to turn away from the atrium. So it's not looking down and then moving towards. Moving to out of your point of your way, moving to the atrium, then turning away and moving down. And then basically moving down happens like this. So until somewhere at this point of moving down the stairs, you're visible from basically here. When this comes down from the ceiling to at about shoulder height, then the owner is allowed to start to see what's below, but it's exposed all the way as moving down to that point. So we have this kind of, the visual power here is on the ones on the down floor, because they can see the one moving down instead of the person moving down, the owner seeing those on the ground floor. And this is a fairly unusual configuration. You usually have a situation where the owner sees the crowd, or where there's a simultaneous reveal of the crowd and the owner. This is different, of course, in the main stair, where it's this opposite, the ones down there, and you seeing your face and you seeing the face of the ones down there simultaneously in the same way. If we look at this building as a disjunction type, referring back to what I did in Santiago, Chile, and looking at how different figures operate in this, and the slightly lighter line here are visibility, and the darker lines are permeability. We can see that the Josephine Baker House more or less conforms to this type, which means that it's a continuously increasing depth of permeability, but a sort of zigzag pattern or a rhythm of continuous hiding and showing, and hiding and showing, and hiding and showing visibility-wise, which makes it closer to some kind of hide-and-seek game or theater. Now, if we talk about narratives of exposure, we're going to move to here, to Sophia's analysis of Sir John Soane's museum, and how there's a continuous pattern here of revealing and hiding in a different way. It's a revealing and hiding for the visitor moving around the gallery. And I hope I'm referring to this correctly now, but moving around the gallery, continuously showing places you have been and places you will be, and revealing various forms of art or spaces in that way. Whereas if we compare this to the Baker House, what is continuously revealed and hidden is places you will never be. It is also continuously hiding and revealing places where the owner would be rather than where the artwork would be. So it's sort of always suggesting that the owner could be here, 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 you cannot, and so on. Which makes it possible to refer this and compare to Rear Window by Alfred Hitchcock, which is a narrative built on exactly this, being allowed to see partially things that you will never access. And this is the entire narrative. And it's also a film that really describes the psychology of assumptions going on when you see parts of people's life and construct the rest of it, which is the imaginary inside the imaginary inside the imaginary. And again, since we're imagining Law's imaginary, it's another imaginary on top of that, which we have to put into this. But so this is basically what the building does. It constructs a rear window kind of narrative of suggested possibilities of Baker's life, where you have to assume other parts of Baker's life, and to make sure, if you ever see Baker or whatever, you have to construct the narrative of the hidden. So I would say that rather than a narrative of the visible, this constructs a narrative of the hidden, which forces you to imagine rather than allows you to imagine what would happen in these hidden places by showing partially only what could be. And it's, again, it's showing partially what could be rather than partially what is, which also starts and fuels the imagination. That is, the existence not only doors not allowed to pass through, but vistas offering partial views of a deeper insight suggest activities and potential links between and to spaces and form a narrative of the unseen as well as the seen, just as the absent body in the pool makes its presence known by implication. It can be argued that for this quality to be invoked, it is necessary that the view of the depth is partial and has a certain level of presence and focality. So, I could go on for a while, but I'm not going to do this. I'm going to conclude by saying a few things of how this analysis has to be constructed, because that's one of the main points. In order to do this, and we can compare this to, again, for instance, the analysis of the Soames Museum, is that for the Soames Museum, it operates very much on the basis of understanding, on the one hand, configuration as an allocentric thing, configuration as a relation between the person and the object. Whereas, to even get into this discussion about Laws and Baker, we have to move into the imaginary of Laws as a situation of a relation through space of two persons. We cannot reduce this to one person, and we cannot expand this to allocentricity, because both of these disallow all of these interpretations. We don't have to go to two subjects, we can go to a few subjects, but we cannot go to all subjects in all potential configurations. We have to start and look at what do these allocentric and personal setups say about the potentials of a small number of peoples and how their relations and various kind of communications and interactions could take place. So the Baker House as a spatial construct simply challenges the relation between subject and object and allows it to play out differently depending on the social and cultural positions and relations of the subjects involved, set in a social cultural context that further informs the play. In both cases, it can be argued that the configurations might have disciplinary effects for both the visitor and owner, although the power relations, both social and over the space of the house, construct a complex tension between exposure and viewer, and representation and passivity, which is not easily disentangled. But the central question in the end becomes what exactly in the configuration of this building, which, if you compare it to others, mostly is comparable to museums, what exactly is Josephine Baker asked to be? Okay, thank you.
I like the rear window illusion. It seems to me that that's really important. This is about the experience of trying to understand the parts of the building that you cannot see, and the assumptions you then make about what that might be. And I think that ties very nicely into the life of a person who's celebrity. Where actually your imagination is about the parts that you can't see, what is a genuine personal life. And I think you probably isolated exactly what that building's about. It's about an exploration of the imagination of this beautiful diva celebrity in their personal life. And what can architecture do to illustrate or to elaborate that understanding of what might be the other side of the wall. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, actually.
I also like your presentation a lot for a slightly a connected reason, but I'd like to put it slightly differently. You use the term imaginary. I'm wondering if the term imaginative might allow generalization instead of imaginary. So Sonit Bafna was arguing in the last conference that in the same way as traditional space syntax has been about social function, so he wanted to develop a syntax of visual form, which would be about the imaginative function of buildings, the ability of buildings to set the mind on track. And thinking maybe too traditionally, he saw that in the visual as opposed to the spatial. Your presentation and Sophia's work over the years makes me think that maybe we can talk about the imaginative function as being also inherent in the spatial function, and as encompassing the social, so theatricality. And in this particular case, staging things has to do with desire, and maybe that can be made to fit into the relationship of the public persona versus the private persona, but that may be in a way the particular case. Maybe the general theoretical thesis is that in the staging of seeing and being seen, maybe even the spatial structure takes us to the imaginative function and then interacts with a more traditional imaginative function that art criticism has sought in the visual structure. So to me, that's the larger framework that then maybe your study, as well as Sophia's studies in the past, and I hope some of mine at times, have set in motion.
And I think that's true because, I mean, contextualizing this paper a bit as between the former and some future paper, this is the line of reasoning that I will pursue in the sort of next step of work, which is how does sort of an imaginary setup like this work in other situations? So a small number of people configured through space and maybe never happening, but still.
But
there.
it's not imaginary as in not present. It's imaginative as in seeing in the thing in front of you potentialities and latencies not in front of you. So that's not the imaginary function. It's the imaginative.
Yeah, that's sorry. That's just my English. I agree with you.
Okay.
I don't know if you're aware of Penelope Karalapidou's study of the Theatrical house.
Yes.
She published an article some time ago, I think, in the Journal of Architecture. And I can try to summarize her argument, and I'm sure I'm not making justice to it, but she's starting from the strips on the elevation of the facade, and she says that in the spatial experience of the house, these go vertically along the sections, and they occur based on the rhythm of the windows, the way the windows are placed. So as the person walks up the staircase, the body is framed by these windows, and she makes them in comparison with Marcel Duchamp's The New Descending Staircase. So I wonder whether something like that would be really interesting to take into consideration how it would link to your idea of frames.
Well, I think it does. If I understand in a certain way, and I hope I understand your question and follow that correctly, and that analysis, because one of the reasons I don't so much refer to it is that it requires to expand the analysis to include the exterior, which I have to cut the analysis somewhere, so I opted out of that. But you could say that the similar play of the imaginative and partial reveal goes on also in the outside of the building, which you can extend many of these analyses to see that it's sort of doing the same relation to exterior and interior, and also the narrative of the body moving inside of there as it does interior. But I have not had the chance to sort of properly look at this. Is more of a partly from that paper, partly from just looking at the building.
Yeah, I mean,
I haven't had the time
the connection I would make with the frame that you showed in the rear window is that frame in this case, the way in which Penelope discusses it, is more about framing of the body along a path, whereas you look at the ways in which you can piece together a narrative out of frames that you look synchronic.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's true. Yes.
So there's an interesting way to look at framing.
But there's also outside the building you have the narrative of it actually having up to 3 sides which actually have windows, which means that there's a synchronous thing going on, but there's also an asynchronous thing going on where you can see certain parts of the building only if you look at one side of the facade, and then you can see certain parts when you look at several facades, and then you can see certain parts looking again only at one. So it becomes an interplay between asynchronous and synchronous.
There's another dimension that could link in nicely, and that is in terms of material use. Adolf Loos had a particular fascination with whether things were really what they were or whether they were constituted by something else. And so it'd be quite interesting to explain the materiality of what the proposition is in this case. There's a really good paper by Wilfred Wang in one of the, there's a 9H on loose architecture, which explores exactly that in various of his buildings. I'm not sure that he talks about this building.
I don't think so.
He does the Vienna Bank and various others, but that issue of whether something is really marble or whether it's actually marble around a steel column turns out to be really an area that Loos clearly was exploring at the time about whether something had to be what it appeared to be.
That's a good suggestion. I don't know how to tie it in, but
I think it's. I think the architect is exploring reality and the imagined, as John says.
Okay, thank you. We're way over time, I think.
But there was